Our first speaker will explore the deep structural shifts AI is bringing to journalism and the critical questions that raises for news organizations around strategy and organization and editorial values. She has advised leading newsrooms around the world on how to integrate AI responsibly. She's widely recognized for her work at the intersection of technology and journalism. She's an ICFJ Knight Fellow, a data scientist, journalist, and Harvard-recognized AI futurist, founder of Newsroom Robots Labs, and host of the Newsroom Robots podcast. It's my pleasure to welcome Nikita Roy.
Hello, everyone. It is actually really great to be here in the Nordics because I think you'll do amazing, amazing work. And so I'm very excited to be talking to all of you today. And before we get into AI and start that whole discussion for the rest of the day, I want us to go back in time a little bit. Feels right because we're sitting in an old printing press of JP Politicon. But let's go back all the way to 1833. When a 23-year-old printer in the US decided of how could we make journalism and start creating a newspaper for just 1 cent, when at the time, newspapers costed about 6 cents. It was only for the elite, the wealthy. But he decided, what if journalism was for everyone, and we asked advertisers to fund it? And that's how the penny press was created, the advertising business model, and the entire reinvention of journalism business model that we are very familiar with today. The question wasn't, how do we create and continue to produce the journalism that we do today? The question was, how can we completely reinvent journalism's business model to make it accessible to everyone with the technology that existed? Let's take a step forward in the next century when radios came about. If you remember that shift from print to radio, in the beginning, all newsrooms did was port over newspapers to the radio wave in the beginning. It was just saying the headlines all on the radio. But then pioneers like Edward R. Murrow had asked the question, what if radio could do something that newspapers never could? That led to the reinvention of a journalist when audience was being brought into events in real time, in live real time, covering wars, and everything was all a whole shift in the dynamic of journalism. I'm keeping on talking about all of these things because they are more than just turning points in the history of journalism. These are first principle moments that we have experienced already in the history. And first principle is not some business jargon or Silicon Valley talk. It is actually a concept that dates almost 2,000 years ago, starting with Aristotle, who said that the first basis from which a thing is known is its first principle. Well, in plain English speak, all that means is that if you strip away all of the assumptions, all of the habits of this is the way we usually do it, and you go back to the foundation of what it is that you're doing, how do you deliver value? And so that is the question that I'm bringing out today, that I want to ask you, and that we need to be thinking about and shifting to a first principles moment of thinking with thinking about AI, how we incorporate it into our strategy, into our organization, into our values. The question is not just how we use AI to do yesterday's problems and use a 20th century logic for just a whole 21st century paradigm shift. The question now becomes, what is journalism really for? In an age where AI can completely remix your content and produce completely personalized podcasts and newsletters, what is journalism really for? And why and what do people truly need us for? It's about going back and drilling down to the foundations of why do we exist in the first place and building up from there. And the reason that we have to talk about this right now is because the tech industry operates from a first principles moment. They are thinking and building like Google and OpenAI, reinventing how are people going to access the news. And as a result, they are building platforms and products that are not always in line with the values of journalism. As a result, that means that sometimes you have issues that we are asking wrong questions. So we are asking the questions from a completely different perspective. We are asking, how do we plug AI into our existing workflows? We are asking, how do we make our CMSs a little smarter? And we are asking, how do we push more content onto more platforms? It's, again, doing the exact same things that we did for yesterday's newsroom with today's technology and a technology that is evolving in the future. That's the wrong question that we've been asking so far. When the way in which tech companies are approaching this entire evolution of the information ecosystem is from a first principles approach. The questions they're asking is, what do people really need from news? How do people want to access and engage with information today? And if we started over today, with today's technology, what would we build? And I can see everyone's phones are going up, and I will let you know that at the end, you can scan a QR code and you will be able to access all of these slides, so feel free to put those phones down. But this is the key question. We are operating at different levels. They are talking about a complete reinvention, a complete approach of like just breaking down everything and making everything from scratch, whereas we are talking about, let's just add AI to everything that we're doing already, and there's a complete mismatch. The issue with that is that platforms operate on a different level, they control the audience, and they reinvent the information ecosystem while we're stuck adapting and following the lead of tech platforms who do not follow our values. That's the same thing that happened with social media. And that's, once again, going to happen if you don't start thinking from a first principles mindset. This is an example of where journalism is already facing that issue. As Ezra had pointed out yesterday, people have, in the US especially, have access to a ChatGPT subscription more than a news subscription. But when I went to ChatGPT today and I asked, what's the latest news in Denmark? I'm seeing AP News, ABC, Reuters. I'm not really seeing JP Politiken over here. Well, maybe that might be because the Danish media is threatening to sue OpenAI. They don't want to get into any trouble with the Danish media, so they're just blocking it. But our audience is just left in the blind. They don't really know all of these politics that's happening behind the scenes. They don't realize that they are just receiving a Western version of what is happening in Denmark and not really what exactly the local news over here is reporting on. AP and Reuters are not having the exact same context and relevance that the newsrooms over here have, and our audience are missing out on that. But tech is not thinking about that. And that's an example of the misalignment of values that happen. But this is all happening because they are thinking from a first principles approach. Their only objective is, how do we reinvent things? These things might get fixed in time, but this is the place where we have to stop and think, are we preparing for yesterday's newsroom and trying to use today's technology? Or are we going to start building for tomorrow's newsrooms and start building platforms and ways and new ways in which we can experience the news that are aligned with our own values? There are few key trends I want to ground us in to understand what exactly is changing and how those shifts are occurring. And one of the first things is that Gen AI is fundamentally a revolution of the user experience of the news ecosystem. Well, the whole thing for me actually is one of the biggest modality shifts that we're seeing is not chatbots, it is real-time voice interaction. Back in December 2024, ChatGPT's advanced voice mode launched real-time vision, interacting with the world around you. News, information, everything, you can ask it in real time, and it's able to be your companion. A lot of the tech companies are building AI companions for their audience. And in that same realm, and back in December 2024, I am somebody who has been using voice interaction apps for a really long time. 2023. But Pi was one of those first apps that I was using when ChatGPT came out with the advanced voice mode. I'm somebody who talks to AI all the time. I talk to Perplexity when there is a breaking news that happens, because I know, especially in the US, most of the newsrooms are going to be cited in Perplexity's news. It's pretty accurate. It can tell me all of the context. It can adapt to my understanding. It can fill my gaps. And sometimes it gets things wrong, but for me to just get a gist of what's exactly happening when something breaks, Perplexity, and I have a conversation with it, does a pretty good job. And so with all of those things, one of the main things I had written for my Neiman Lamp predictions at Harvard University, I said back in December 2024 that AI will turn news into a conversation in 2025, a new way in which we are going to adapt and interact with the news beyond the article. My entire argument in that piece was that we move away from the article and we invent a news experience. My opening line was that in 2025, we won't just read the news. We'll talk to it, and it will talk back to us. But I have to admit, I got it wrong, because it didn't happen in 2025. It happened in December 2024, just days after this was published, where Time AI, for the first time, had a conversation with an article which was their main feature story of the People of the Year, where they had Donald Trump featured as the Person of the Year for that day, for the year of 2024. I could go and now have a conversation as to why Time magazine decided to make Donald Trump Person of the Year. Get insights into his political background, his career, what went on in his first term of presidency, what his visions are for this term. I was able to now adapt a conversation to my understanding. And now we bring to the present in April 2024, where are we with this voice modality? Well, in the US, you can go to Google Labs and experiment with Google's Daily Listen. This is a way in which you can convert your normal Google Discovery feed, which is already tailored to you, that I would usually be scrolling and clicking through to get to news websites. Well, now it's converted into a 5-minute daily podcast, completely personalized for me. Yes, it shows up with different news articles that I can click and go through, but that 5-minute personalized podcast is all for me, and it solves that information need. The tech platforms are able to innovate with that level and bring in that personalization. They are now not just having data and the metadata and all of the cookies and those kinds of stuff. They are having interactions. They are understanding really at a very individual level through the conversations that we have, the prompts that we're giving, exactly what our mindset is, exactly what do we want in that particular point of time. We don't have that level of data. The tech companies do, because they are building that infrastructure. Microsoft Copilot just this month said, beyond even just the news, you can ask for a podcast on anything. Well, over here, if you want to generate a podcast on fun facts about dinosaur, here's a podcast about that. If you want to have a podcast about AI and journalism, well, you don't need to listen to the Newsroom Robots podcast. This will create a summary podcast for you about AI and journalism, drawing upon from all the work and other work of other journalists as well. You can take this one step further now with Microsoft AI, because you can actually interrupt it, have a conversation with the podcast host, and again, go deeper. There's a whole conversational dialogue, a whole new modality that we are experiencing with how people are going to be interacting with their information ecosystem. And so this idea of how do we have a conversation, and if Microsoft is doing it, what does that mean for the work that I am doing and the podcast that I have that is about AI and journalism? Will people be listening to it? Why would people be listening to it? This is something that I've been thinking for a really long time, and it was more than just chatbots and more than voice. We've been working on something to create a way in which you can access this trusted information from podcasts and from works. And so we've been working on something which is the first AI clone, I'm saying, of a journalist. Nikita AI, where it is trained on all of the Newsroom Robots podcast episodes, trainings that I do, talks like this one that I do that are public and then gets input into this space. Everything that I've probably written online, on LinkedIn, everything gets into this, and this becomes that trusted source, because if you trust me as your host, as your guide on the podcast, if you trust the brand of Newsroom Robots, and you have a question about AI and journalism and trying to figure that out, this is a place and a stepping stone for you to go to. And at the surface, it's a chatbot right here. You can ask questions. I have a journalist who's very skeptical about using AI. What do I do? How do I get started? And it pulls out ideas from what people from Tromsø have said, and Lars had said from Tromsø, and how Radio Canada had approached it. All of this information that has been vetted and put together in this system, instead of just going out the wide web. And so this is something that we've been doing. And the other part about it, which excites me even more, is that you can have a conversation with Nikita. And you can talk to Nikita in more than 30 languages. I can only speak English and just a bit of Hindi, and it's not that great. But now I can talk to you in Danish and French and make the content accessible and the information and knowledge about how newsrooms worldwide are using AI in journalism, so that you can contextualize information for yourself through this particular app. And so this is just one example of how you start to think about, where does your brand and your trust lead to for the future? How do you start to future-proof yourself from the eventual shifts that are going to be happening? It's not just building a chatbot or just building a new voice interaction, but it's about fundamentally going back and reimagining, what is it that we do? Why do we do it? Why does a person come to my podcast? There's a very interesting framework. It's called the Jobs to be Done framework. It's a product framework where you are not solving a user's problem necessarily, but a user is coming and hiring your product to solve a job for them. And there's a difference in that, because you are not going and buying a hammer. Well, the hammer is actually solving the problem, but you want to go and create holes in your walls, and you are hiring that product to create holes in the walls. You go one step further. Why are you creating holes in a wall? Well, you're creating holes in a wall because you just moved into an apartment and you wanted to make it feel like home. And so that's why you have all of these holes, so that you can stick up the pictures on it. Well, it comes into a deeper emotional layer of why a person ends up going and buying a hammer rather than just going and saying, I want a bunch of holes in the walls. This sort of new product framework is a question that we have to start thinking. Why would our audience hire our news app, our news, our journalism? For what job are they solving with that? A problem is sometimes a frustration. I can deal with it. Well, a job is a necessity. I need to get something done, and I need to be able to get that done and move through. And so that's one way in which you start thinking about applying ways and new ways and finding more jobs that we can solve for our audience. And the next key trend is when AI agents become your audience. A lot of the conversation right now in the industry focuses on ChatGPT and Microsoft and Google took our data, scraped our data, and trained on it. And they're scraping our data and creating a chatbot and Copilot. But there are even more fundamental shifts happening. Well, not all of the chatbots we are going after. Another interesting chatbot that we all should be looking at is Grok from Elon Musk's X. You can go and ask, they literally have it as personas, latest news. And it brings up all of the latest news from all of these newsrooms, which I don't believe have the partnerships with them necessarily. This is highly accessible. If you are on X, if any of you still are on X, well, you can go and ask Grok for summaries right within your Twitter threads. And that's, again, a fundamental shift. How many of these AI players, because it's not just the AI giants. There's another tech startup called Confluence AI, where I asked it, it had it right in its demo as a prompt. Give me a summary of a business financial story from a right and a left-leaning website. And in its prompt, it literally said that if you come across a paywall, here's how you can bypass it. Take the link, go to archive.ph, you will bypass the paywall, and you can give the summary. So it's more than just scraping articles. It's not even tech giants, but all of these numerous tech startups that are creating an entire ecosystem of apps and experiences that are always looking towards news and getting that information and creating experiences out of them. This is an example from ChatGPT's deep research. Well, over here, within 8 minutes, it was able to give me an entire table of all of the news licensing deals that publishers have done with AI companies, something that would take weeks for research to happen. It goes and it searches all of the different websites. Again, going and accessing multiple different websites. But one important thing, again, over here, ChatGPT is only accessing websites that they have a partnership deal with, which means, again, all of the Danish media doesn't even get covered if there's anything regarding Denmark a user over here is going and accessing. And they are increasingly becoming information sources for people. Another example is from ChatGPT's operator, because we're talking all about scraping. Well, what would you do if AI starts acting like a human and starts visiting websites and reading websites like a human? It's not scraping your data. It's just going and accessing the computer. But instead of you, it's just a computer that is doing it. This is an example where I told it to go to like the BBC, The Guardian, Business Insider, six different news websites, and I told it to go to the homepage of all of these different websites, look at what was there across all of them, summarize what were the key topics that were covered across all of the homepages, what was different among everything. It's going, accessing all of your information, can create all kinds of summaries for me. This is a different type of infrastructure. It's not scraping your data. It is going and performing actions on your behalf. And so there are new ways in which AI is evolving. And one of the main important things that has had a huge upward trend in conversations, especially in the tech industry, is something called the Model Context Protocol. This is like an open infrastructure, a new way in which AI agents could possibly interact with different tools and data sources. And here is an example of Claude, which is connected through this MCP client to the New York Times. Florent Dordain's at Hugging Face just built this out. It's slightly technical at the moment, but I can totally see how this is going to evolve. He connects it to the New York Times information, and he can, right here in Claude, ask it information, even if Claude is not having a partnership with it. This is currently not against the terms of conditions. He has spoken to New York Times, so he hasn't broken anything over there. But this is just showing you new infrastructures that are coming up for how models can interact with trusted data sources, with trusted tools to create new experiences. All of this is important for us to start thinking about. If MCP is something that you're hearing for the first time today, or you are not very familiar with it, your newsroom hasn't spent a lot of time on it, we have to start thinking, experimenting, figuring out what it is, because these are all potential opportunities and shifts that are happening in the industry, things that we need to think about in terms of our strategy, for our business model. How do we reinvent things? Is MCP a protocol in which we start to license news as data? Because one thing is for sure, we need to start preparing for the death of the article as we know it. And I know that's scary, because that's what we've been doing. But if you think about how a model looks at an article, it's taking that entire thing, but it's actually a container for a bunch of data points. It's a container. An AI model is making sense of all of the different data points. It's a container for the quotes and the facts and the counterpoints and the analysis, the interpretation, the context, all of these different points that all get structured into an article. This is already happening because I showed you all of those examples of Google creating a personalized podcast. What it's doing is taking your articles, remixing it, taking out all of that, putting it all together. A new infrastructure that it's building, which means that's already happening in the tech industry. That's already a future pathway that is being created that audience are getting used to. Once again, if we are holding on so dear to that, are there ways in which we can start to incorporate and start thinking of how can we create news as structured, verified information? Does it always have to be an article? And what happens if your article is copyrighted according to the copyright law, but these facts are not necessarily copyrighted? Anyone can start to create that. How do we start to gatekeep, or do we gatekeep if you are maybe a public broadcaster? There are different conversations that need to be happening. What do we do if we say our whole interest is to serve the democracy and serve our audience, but our audience is not getting our information from us, they're getting bits and pieces from other sources, but ChatGPT has now become their direct source for news. With all of these different things, the first principles approach also comes to just how do you structure your organization for innovation to be able to tackle and deal with this. If you look at the newsrooms of today, they still exist very similar to how the print newsrooms in the beats and columns, and you have editorials separate in most newsrooms, and product and tech is a completely different story. Well, there are newsrooms that are trying and thinking of new and different ways in which they can incorporate all the different voices. And one example is CNN's product team, which Upasana Gupta, who came on the Newsroom Robots podcast from CNN, said that they're structuring their product teams like a tech company. So they have a bunch of squads. Each squad is responsible for multiple different things. So like your video, your mobile, your broadcast TV. One is just their internal platform, which is what Upasana works on. And they have created squad structures. Each squad has an editorial lead, a design lead, a product lead, and tech lead. This leads to collaboration, interdisciplinary collaboration. Because there is one thing in my experience working with newsrooms and training journalists, this is not a conversation that journalists can be left out of. In fact, when you empower your journalist with the technical skills to start thinking and understanding exactly how AI is, a lot of the true innovation comes from there, because they are starting to build workflows and solve pain points for their particular problems. They are using AI and hiring AI to do jobs for them, different particular jobs that they are finding out that only people who from editorial are able to understand, and product can help and implement that. And those type of interdisciplinary collaborations is what you're seeing. And another part, apart from this, is sometimes it's very hard to innovate in a legacy system. You have something that has been working for years after years, decades. How do you innovate from that? Well, maybe you branch out and create something new that does not have to adhere to that legacy. It's an AI lab, and that's what's exactly happening. The Atlantic created an AI lab, and The Economist, just on Tuesday, announced an AI lab, which is supposed to be reimagining their journalism and is allowed to rethink different ways in which how AI can serve journalism outside of the traditional legacy systems. And in fact, The Economist is hiring for their technical lead, so you should check that out if you're interested. But The Atlantic has been doing this, and you've seen products that they have built as a result, and one of them was an interesting one that I thought was surfacing articles while you were browsing, wherever you were browsing on websites. So you could be browsing The Guardian and talking about climate change or anything, and at the same time, you want to get The Atlantic's take. And so it's The Atlantic take, and you can get all of their articles. this means that can we go even beyond just having their articles over there? Could we be creating news companions that are with us as we are journeying through the web and browsing through the web because we trust your news brand to be our guide? Instead of always having to go and read an article, are there places where we can go and ask, get information to verify what we're seeing is right or wrong? The technology exists today. And yes, there are still issues with hallucinations and accuracy, but we have to think about building for tomorrow's technology because the rate at which this is all increasing and rapidly evolving is at a speed that we haven't seen before. And so what do we start thinking about of what are the new future experiences for news? Because I truly believe that true innovation begins for us when we go back to the first principles. What is it that we truly do? And if you were somebody who never saw a newsroom, that's my challenge for you. If you were somebody who never saw a newsroom and you were just coming into it today, but you were an audience member who wanted to figure out and knew that journalism needs to have trusted, verified information, what would you build with today's technology? Not knowing exactly what the legacies of the digital era, social media, print existed, with today's technology, what would you be building? Because the first principle of journalism, the core value of what we do, is trusted, verified information. How do we get that to people in different ways? And this is extremely, extremely important for us to start thinking about right now, because tech companies are already doing this and are going to be shaping and creating platforms and algorithms that do not align with the values of journalism, which will lead to us, again, missing out and just following them instead of leading. Journalism has a very, very short window, in my opinion, to be able to take back and regain some of that control that we had lost during the print era. I find this quite symbolic to be sitting in a room full of AI geeks and nerds right here, but we are sitting in the old printing press of J.P. Politiken just a few decades ago, because that is showing of how something that was so strong in journalism was at its peak just disappeared. We let go of print. Print newspapers still exist, right? But not at the level, and we had to completely, radically adapt and rethink how things were happening. And that's the same thing. I'm asking and encouraging you to go back to your newsroom and ask this question. What would you build for today's technology if you had nothing, no legacy to follow, and you were building it from scratch with the only value being trusted, verified information for your audience? This is journalism's time to regain that control that we lost, and we have to evolve from just incremental changes that have been happening in the newsroom to a radical reinvention and rethinking of what the news experience is. Thank you.